coming back to the Mantra House. Good to see you all again. And those of you I haven't met yet, I'm so happy to see you. And you know, you drive down the streets here and you see this kind of quiet, unassuming neighborhood, and then you come in here and it's bursting with spiritual energy. And it just shows that anywhere you go, you can transform the environment and make it spiritual. That's really exciting to know, because whatever space you live in and wherever you happen to travel to, wherever you happen to work, with adjustment of the consciousness, which is really the new frontier, isn't it? Consciousness. And you can transform not only yourself, but all the environment that's around you. One of the most important aspects in our lives, one that will make more difference to all of us than practically anything else, is the way that we communicate with other people. This is true in relationships, in the work that you do, and people that you meet incidentally. You through your communication are developing your life in various ways. So it makes sense then that one would think about how to communicate better, and even think about what communication is in the first place. Would you agree with me about communication being important? Thank you. First, I want to talk in communication about something that's very deep, and that is intention. Can you see intention? I've been trying to figure out if I can see it or not. Do you ever notice that you have a particular intention when you're speaking to somebody, or for anything else in your life? What is an intention anyway? Can somebody describe what an intention is?
Conscious decision.
A conscious decision, something you intend to do. I mean, you can even look it up if you like. You know when you have one though, right? Do you know that you have an intention when you're doing certain things? I mean, it's a little hard to put your finger on. If somebody asks you if you're hungry, anybody here hungry?
Yeah.
How do you know you're hungry? Can you prove it? Can you show us that you're hungry? You just know that you are. I thought about that the other day. I suddenly felt hungry. I said, how do I know that I'm hungry? That's really amazing. I just know it. And we also know that we have intentions also. And even more amazing than that is other people know that we have an intention, because it comes out in our communication. When you communicate with somebody and you have a particular intention, other people, people are smart. They're sensitive. We're called sentient beings. It's because we're sensitive. We can sense things. We can sense things beyond just the gross level. We can sense what somebody's intention is. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody and then you sensed what their intention was in talking to you? Can you remember what that was? For instance, someone comes over to your house and says, you know, you're one of the smartest people I ever met. And, like, your kids, you know, they're beautiful, and, like, your whole life is amazing to me. And by the way, can I borrow your lawnmower? I think after you lend your lawnmower, I wonder if he really meant all those other things. Did he really mean that? What was the intention? Just to borrow the lawnmower. In fact, somebody taught me once, when you write a letter and you're going to ask for something, first ask for it and then write all the other nice stuff afterwards. In other words, don't leave it to the end, because then people will assume that, oh, they said all that nice stuff just so that I lend them my lawnmower. They didn't really care. But the intention in when we're communicating is vitally important. There's a branch of study in communication called nonviolent speech, nonviolent communication. And the essence of it is to not ascribe any intention to somebody when you're talking to them. In other words, if somebody you're living with, does anybody here live with somebody else? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Everyone else, pretty peaceful life, eh? Somebody comes in, they close the door too hard. You might even say they slam the door, and then you jump, and it's like, you always slam the door, and you're just trying to disturb me. Did I ascribe intention? Yeah, what is intention did I ascribe?
They're always trying to disturb.
They wanted to disturb me, right? So then what's the reaction of the person?
Oh, I did it. I don't always.
I don't always, and that wasn't, how do you know what my intention was? So in nonviolent speech, the same situation would happen. Somebody slammed the door, and you say, I know you didn't mean to, but I just want to tell you how it makes me feel when you slam the door. I was sitting here, and it made me feel like you didn't care, or you were trying to disturb me, even though I know that wasn't your intention. And that changes the whole tenor of the conversation. As soon as I take away that intention, then the other person has space to say, oh, okay, yeah, I understand. That disturbed you. But it doesn't inflame the situation. It doesn't make it worse. So see if you can notice when you're communicating with other people, first of all, what your intention is. And also, try taking that away from your communication with other people, that is, ascribing intention to somebody else and saying, this is what you meant to do. And you'll notice that the communication opens up rather quickly. So there's a few points. That was on my mind, so I wanted to bring it up right away. Here are a few other points about communication. Many of them are very practical. Are you ready for some practical things? Say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. The body really is a biomechanical robot. It has levers and pulleys and all kinds of organs. You don't even know how they work. They're just working. We're inside that. As spiritual beings, we inhabit a body. And when we speak to others, sometimes we can look at the body and we can be thinking that somebody else that's the body I'm speaking to. But the books of wisdom from the East say that go beyond that when you communicate to other people. They use the word anupashyati. Pashyati means to see, and anu means to follow. So it says try to follow a higher instruction when you're speaking to people, and try to see beyond just the body, and think that you're talking to a spiritual soul, a spiritual being. And when you do that, there's a tendency to change the conversation or mold it in such a way that the person will be able to appreciate what you're saying. It's a concept, so it's a little ethereal and not so practical like I just promised you. But it is a premise that you can work from. Does that make sense? Can you reflect back to me, anybody, what I just said? Go ahead. I think you're right on.
When you speak to people, you speak to their soul, and you look at it as not just as a material body, but something going beyond that as a spiritual.
Thank you. Very good. Good listening. Yeah, think about who the person actually is that you're speaking to. Is it a mechanical body, or is there a soul inside? So the next is very practical, and that is to know what is the most interesting topic to every person in the entire world. Who said that? I've got a ringer in here. You know what's going on. So this is, many people have said it, the Vedic wisdom scriptures say it, that people have a sense of themselves. And for instance, if you're in a crowded room and everybody's talking, like later when you're all sitting here having prasadam and eating, and everybody's talking, and then you're sitting over here talking, and then across the room you hear your name. Somebody says, they're talking, you say, Danya, and Danya looks over and goes, what? Who said that? What are they talking about? So, in communicating with other people, keep in mind what is the most interesting subject to every person, and that's him or herself. that goes a long way. A sociologist did an experiment about 20 years ago. I read this experiment that he did where he would go in public places and start up a conversation. And he would sit there and talk to the person, and he would never bring up himself. He would only ask questions and become interested more and more in the other person. And then he had an assistant that would afterwards interview the person. He would come out and say, actually, this person, he didn't identify himself. He'd just come up and say, actually, I'm interested to know how your conversation went. And they went through hundreds of conversations where the person didn't bring up anything about himself. He kept asking more and more questions. And they would say to the assistant that was the most interesting person that I ever talked to. Fascinating person. But they didn't know much about them because he didn't reveal anything. But the person felt very engaged and so forth. So that relates to another point, which is a much underutilized skill, and that's listening. Oftentimes, when I'm speaking to somebody, having a conversation, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next, rather than actually listening. Stephen Covey, who's a bit of a philosopher, said, oftentimes when we're listening to people, we're listening not to understand, but to reply. I'm listening because then I'm thinking, well, what am I going to say when they stop? Instead of actually listening deeply and trying to appreciate what the other person's intention is, what they're going through, and so forth. And if you try this, it's very practical. If you try putting aside your own agenda, which may be racing through your mind, that when this person stops talking, I'm going to tell them something even more important. Or more likely, as soon as this person starts telling me about themselves or what they're going through, I'm going to tell them something about myself that's even better. Even if you're showing compassion or empathizing, I can empathize with that, with something much better, that something much worse happened to me. Well, communication experts say don't do that. Try to listen and appreciate what that person's going through, and really try to understand. And in that moment of understanding, extending yourself to that person, really extending yourself, then you'll notice that this mystical kind of ever-deepening communication opens up. Who would like to reflect the basic concept back to me? Yes.
Be a better listener.
Yes. Is it something that can be practiced? Yeah, and if you can practice it, you can get good at it. And so there's a professor of rhetoric in New York. I read his book. It's called How to Win an Argument. And he writes in his book that in debate, one of the biggest mistakes people make is they don't listen to what the other person's saying, because they've got something in their mind how they want to answer. So he said, what happens is they're having a debate and nobody really knows what it's about, because nobody's listening. Each one of them's thinking, how am I going to reply to the other person? So they never actually get clear, and the conversation tends to veer off in unproductive directions. So listening is very powerful if you learn how to listen to what other people are saying without judging it. It may be somebody that you don't completely agree with what they're saying, but first listen and try to understand. This is kind of like Aikido, the Japanese martial arts. Does anybody here do Aikido? No, because I was going to ask for a demonstration. Aikido is you can see, I've seen in Japan, I saw an old man. He was 89 years old. And he was doing martial arts in a dojo as a demonstration. And there were young men much stronger and bulkier than he was. And they'd run at him in attack mode. And practically he was throwing them all over the room. with just knowing where the contact points were. And he was using their energy to move them in different directions. So it's not about brute strength, but it's about knowing where the fulcrum points are and so forth. So in communication, one very important way to deepen a conversation and to diffuse potentially contentious conversations is to honor objections. Everyone say honor objections.
Honor objections.
If somebody has an objection that they bring to you, even about yourself, what might be as we call it, a knee-jerk reaction? What might happen?
To retaliate.
You might retaliate right away, right? So somebody comes up and give me an objection.
You're so nosy.
You're so nosy, yeah. And so, if I hear that and he's like, "What do you mean I'm nosy? I'm not nosy." This is not Aikido. This is the opposite. So in communicating in the Aikido way, maybe the name of my next book, is that you honor the objection first. In fact, I don't know if any of you have noticed any companies that are really good at customer service. Are there any out there? I call Apple sometimes, and I notice they've been trained. And how do I notice? They all say the same thing. You call up with an objection. Can you get angry when you call up on a phone because you were on hold for a little while and you're frustrated anyway because your computer doesn't work the way you thought it was going to work? Is that possible? Could that happen? That's good. It makes me feel better that you said that. So you call them up and you say, this thing just doesn't work. It doesn't go the way the instructions say. And what do they say back? They say, "You idiot! You just don't know how to work it. What's wrong?" Is that what they say? No, not like that. No, they'll say something like this: "I know how you feel, and I really want to help you. And I appreciate what you're saying very deeply. I can understand the problem you have and the objection that you've brought up. It's a very valid objection. What am I doing now? Honor, I'm honoring the objection. It is Aikido. The objection comes, I can block it, and then there'll be a huge collision. Right in midair, you'll see smoke and glass and everything flying. But if I honor the objection, it diffuses it right away. So one of the mantras that customer service people use is feel, felt, found. Everyone say feel, felt, found.
Feel, felt, found.
So this is Aikido. It's, I know how you feel. That's how I felt. And here's what I found. You first honor the objection, first appreciate it, empathize with what the person said, and accept it first. And so you have to be able to understand people and empathize and accept what they say first before you're allowed to actually offer any advice in return. So this is one of the very powerful ways in which, even if you do it mechanically at first, you'll notice that you're able to change the kinds of conversations that you have when people bring you objections. They'll bring them to you all wrapped up. Here, take this. And first honor it, and then you can talk about it in a more detailed way so we can work it out. Does anybody want to reflect that part back? Yes.
I noticed that when having conversations with people that you're in relationships with, a lot of the times in order for you to, like what you're saying, to give advice or to be part of the conversation, it's not enough to just hear what they say and just say but to validate what they're saying and let them know that you are on their level or you're trying to be on their level in order to be able to respond to something or to coordinate ideas.
Nice observation. And oftentimes it's the ones that we're closest with that we can feel a little more irritated when they say something. That's possible. And to be able to listen first and understand what they said, even honor the objection that they put out, then you can move on. This is something practical you can put in your pocket, and next time somebody brings you a nice, ripe objection, honor. Wow, that's really a nice objection. I really appreciate that. It's beautiful. Now let's talk about it. Yes?
I feel like number 4 and 3, they go along very nice together. Because if somebody gives an objection, then you listen very well. And then you can take a moment and then...
Yeah, that's a really good point. Many of these overlap. And they all lead towards a flowing way in which one can communicate with other people, which is a very, very powerful thing to do. People they have a lot to offer. If we can communicate with them properly or better and keep improving it, we get better at it. So the next one is to become a master asker. Say master asker.
Master asker.
Now let me give you a secret about language, any language. How am I so bold to say that? Well, I haven't studied every language, but I can tell you that in any language, the question mark is the most important punctuation mark. Make a punctuation mark with your fingers, please. What does it resemble?
Hook.
A hook? Who said a hook? Hook. Okay. Yes, it does look like a hook, doesn't it? Because when you ask questions, and this may seem contradictory, but whoever's asking the questions is leading the conversation. Who leads the conversation?
Who leads the conversation?
Yeah, who leads the conversation?
Person who asks.
Correct. Whoever's asking the questions is leading the conversation. Oftentimes I think I have to tell people things in order to bring them along. I'm going to inform them. But the question mark is a hook. And when you very gently bring the conversation along, you ask questions. And by asking questions, people will be led in a certain direction. You'll see this kind of in a combative way in litigation and things like that. But in a very gentle way, in a meaningful way, notice when you're having a conversation that whoever's asking the questions is leading the conversation. And you can become a master asker. Now, what else does a hook look like if you use your imagination? Maybe some watercolors or finger paints. It could look like, I'll help you out, a tennis racket. So when somebody gives you a question you can't answer, what do? Okay, I'll tell you a story to help you out. There was these two guys walking down. This is in New York. I spent a lot of time in New York. There's two guys walking down the street in New York. One guy was from New York, one was from out of town. So every time the out-of-towner would ask a question, the New Yorker would answer him with a question. And after they went about 3 blocks, the out-of-towner friend turned to his New Yorker friend and said, "Listen, every time I ask you a question, you answer it with another question. Why do you do that?" And his New Yorker friend turned to him and said, "Why do you ask?" I just tell that so you can remember the power of asking questions. Now, if somebody asks you a question you can't answer, what do? Don't try to answer it. It's like trying to hit a pitch that's way wide of the plate. Baseball analogies. So, wait for a pitch you can hit when you're communicating. So how do you do that? Answer a question with a question. Now, if you don't know what question to ask, I'll give you one you can use it every single time. Are you ready? Repeat after me. How do you mean that?
How do you mean that?
Say it again.
How do you mean that?
How do you mean that? Say it again.
How do you mean that?
Oh, that's a powerful mantra. When you're communicating with people and they ask you a question that either you don't like it or you don't know how to answer it, don't try to answer it because you'll mess up. Just answer a question with a question. Because whoever's asking the questions is? Correct. Now, this is, when you put it back and you say, how do you mean that? Now, the people will have to redefine the question. They'll have to hit it back. It's like a tennis racket. Hit it over, and then you don't like it, you hit it back, and you'll notice that pretty soon you're going to get one that you can answer. So if you answer a question with a question. My spiritual master, I used to watch him in action because he met people all over the world. He would meet CEOs and statesmen and cardinals from the church, and they always were interesting conversations, brilliant conversations. I tried to figure out, analyze the way he would communicate. And so I found that he would oftentimes answer questions with questions. So one of them was, I was a young man when I became a monk, and there were a lot of young people that did at that time. And so this one college professor was saying that, usually people wait till they're older to really renounce the world and get into spiritual life. So how come you're, engaging so many young people? And my spiritual master said, what do you mean by old? And he didn't have an answer. So he had hit it back. He asked a question. And then he answered his own question. He said, old means about to die. He said, can you say that you're any older or younger than I am? Because after all, none of us know when we're going to die, right? So I saw this masterful way of communicating with people and using the question, answering question with a question, in order to find out, get to the essence of the matter, reframe it so that it's a much more meaningful kind of conversation. Anybody want to reflect back? Yes.
I have a question because sometimes in interpersonal communication, you can notice that when people ask a question, they're actually doing it to establish dominance, and it isn't just something to like engage the conversation, or that whole thing. Don't ask a question, answer a question with a question, kind of like it being rude also. So how do you like find the balance of not being rude or trying to establish dominance, but being engaging?
Speak to the soul, and speak from your soul, and be sincere. If you're sincere and you're really trying to connect with the person, then that's the ultimate rule in communication. All these other things are techniques, practical, but the principle is that to be sincere and really think about service. How are you trying to serve the person and the situation when you're doing it? That comes out more than anything. That's why I began with intention. Because if your intention is properly aligned, no matter what else you say, it will come out in your voice. It's a very interesting point about intention. It gets mixed into the tenor of your voice. Have you ever had somebody say, I don't like your tone? Really? I won't ask you to tell me about it. It's kind of a cliche, almost like, I don't like your tone. The mother might say it to a kid. It's like, yeah, right, all right, right away. It's like, okay, he said, yeah, right away, but the tone was wrong. The intention was wrong. So we project what's in our heart. So this is the ultimate communication skill, is to actually have a service mind and a service heart and think, how can I do good for others? And so when you're speaking to the other person, if that's your intention, it's uncanny how that actually comes out, even if you make mistakes. So when you use these things, of course you can overuse them. When you first learned how to write a semicolon, you probably put them on every other sentence, and your teacher said, don't use semicolons, you can use one per essay. So you have to be careful not to overuse things. Don't be annoying, and be sincere. Try to help people. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone want to reflect back anything on this point? Yes.
So it's observed that a question can be answered by another question in one's defense, just to buy a time.
Yeah.
You can put that way. But
Yeah.
can number 4, I consider to be applied in this case.
How so? How do you mean that?
Like being, I like the example you gave, the Apple representative.
What's that?
The representative for a call center,
Yes.
can that principle be applied here to like answer the question with a question?
Yes.
Because before that, honoring.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. And then the word honor, you know, you're honoring them. You're appreciating what they're saying. You're not ascribing intention to them, and you're asking a question in that way. And so, yes, very much so. Again, you found an overlap, right? Which is very helpful. All these things, it's holistic. They complement one another. Okay, so now let me talk about another concept that is so life-changing and real. At the same time, it's very mystical how it works. Attention. The word attention and intention are related. They both have the word, the fragment word, it's a seed word, ten. Ten means to stretch towards something. It also means to connect. Like tendons, what do they connect? Muscle and bone, right? So intention and attention. Now, they're related. Whatever your intention is will come out in the way that you give attention to people. But I will say that the way that you administer your attention in your life will be the way that you move in your life. In fact, I'll give you a mantra. Where attention goes, repeat after me.
Where attention goes,
Energy flows.
energy flows.
Where attention goes,
Where attention goes,
energy flows.
energy flows.
You are a conscious living being. This is an amazing concept, to be a conscious living being. And it's happening right now. You're being conscious. You're actually looking at me, and I'm looking at you, and we recognize that we're looking at each other. We're aware that we're aware, and I'm aware that you're aware. So look at somebody right now. It's kind of dangerous, but if you look at somebody in the eyes, what happens? Something happens. We don't know exactly what it is, but if you're driving down the 405 freeway and somebody's driving next to you and you turn and look at them, don't freak out. They'll look at you and go like, what? You know, what did you do? You just looked at them. That's attention is very powerful. You're more powerful than you know. You are a conscious living being, and your consciousness radiates from you. And it touches your environment, and it changes it. And when you look at another living being, when you give your attention to another living being, they know it, they feel it. You can give attention to somebody from across the road, and they'll understand that you're giving attention. So now, in communication, if you give your full attention to somebody, will they notice it? I'll give you an example. I was at a meeting in February. And it was a long, arduous meeting, 10 days of meetings. And during one of the days, I was sitting outside on this veranda, just trying to be serene and look within. And I was completely happy not to communicate to anybody at that particular moment. And a very enthusiastic colleague came up and sat down next to me. My chair was like this. There was a row of chairs. So he sat next to me, and I could tell that he really wanted to talk, and he wanted to tell me something. I didn't feel like it, but then I thought, if I give him half attention, then he'll notice it. So then I made a conscious choice. I said, I'm going to give him full attention. So here's what I did. I suddenly I turned my chair around and I faced him. And he jumped. And he said, wow, no one's really ever done that for me. And I was thinking, what did I do? All I did was give my attention. And you'll notice that if you give fragmentary attention, or if you're giving attention and you divert your attention for even half a second, the person will notice it. That's how powerful your conscious attention is when you give it to somebody else. How can I demonstrate that? Sir, what is your name?
Howard?
Howard? Okay, now, this is just an experiment, so don't feel harmed by it in any way, okay? but please tell me about your morning.
I got up around 7.
What did I just do? What did I just do to Howard? I'm sorry, Howard. Please forgive me. But Howard's such a good sport, and he went and he did this experiment with me. But what did I do to Howard? I diverted my attention. Was it harmful? In a way, yes. You know, I just asked him a question, and all of a sudden, I looked at my watch. What is this? What does this mean anyway when I do this? Yeah, I'm ignoring. Well, you know, ignorance also means ignorance. The two things are related, right? When there's ignorance, there's darkness. The darkness of ignorance we talk about poetically. What is that? Ignorance. I'm turning the other direction. I'm turning away from a conscious being, and I'm diverting my attention. How much time does it take to break the flow? Just that. I have a friend. I talk to him on Skype all the time. He's in different countries all the time. He's my editor, so we're always talking. And then he always looks at his watch. We're best friends, so. He looks at, like, it's just his habit. Look at his watch, because he's a very regulated person. Does everything on schedule. So we're talking, looks at his watch, what do I do? I say, okay, I understand, we gotta go, I gotta go. And he goes, no, 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 no. I didn't mean it. Mean what? Mean what? You just diverted your attention for half a second, and it meant something. So what does it mean when you give your full attention, undivided attention, to somebody else?
You will end it.
It's what?
You will end it.
No, if you break it, you can end it right there. But if you give your full undivided attention to somebody, how do they feel?
Care.
Care for it. You can even say it's love. And now let me propose this to you. I'm actually looking to see if I'm talking over, because I always go. The only thing we actually have to offer is our attention. How does that grab you?
Grabs my attention.
We're units of attention. We're conscious beings. And all we really have to offer to anyone is our attention. Now, what you do with that determines your level of communication and your relationships as well. It even works with plants. I mean, there's an old saying, the best gardener, the best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. What does that mean? Yes, it means you were there. You were there looking at the plant. And somebody said, well, that's just because you know to take care of them when they're thirsty. And so, yes, there's definitely that. But there's a lot more to it with plants and the rest of the world. The way we apportion our attention and who we give our attention to and how we give it makes all the difference in the way that we communicate with others. So you could try this. This is also very practical. If you know somebody, anybody here know anybody? Yeah. You do? One person knows. You know somebody. Okay, if you happen to know somebody, if you happen to have a relationship with somebody, I mean, we have thousands of relationships, directly or indirectly, and you decide that you're going to try this experiment and give that person undivided attention. Even if they live far away, maybe you can, if you write to the way you write to them or the way you interact with them when you actually talk to them. Don't keep anything else in your mind, but give your full attention and listen, try to understand what they're saying, and see what happens. And you'll notice right away that there's an augmented experience in communication when you talk to the person. And now, because we have a few minutes left, I'm going to take some general reflections or questions. But first, reflect back anything that you heard so far that was useful to you. It was something that you could take away, put it in your pocket, you walk out of here, and when you get out that door and somebody grabs you by the arm and says, what was that guy talking about in there? This is what you tell them. Yes?
I was just thinking of an example of an opposite of thinking on the platform of the soul, or like interacting with others with that vision. Where you have these negative outlooks such as like racism and things like that as a result of the opposite way of looking at things.
That's right. I mean, look at the exterior, the external feature of the person, and then a prejudged way of thinking about the person. Whereas when I see the soul, when I'm talking to the soul and I think there's a conscious living being within the body, which is like a covering, it's like a coat. It's going to be changed at some point. They're just passing through that particular body, and you don't relate to them on that level, no judgment on that level at all. Then this is one of the essential principles of communication that is very powerful. Thank you. That was helpful. Yes?
I was curious to see if you could use a full engagement method, not just with people, but with the environment or with nature.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, our environment responds to the intentions we have in our heart, and the way that we express ourselves comes out from that intention, and it affects our environment. We affect our environment very much. In fact, recently we were having lectures, listening to lectures by a scholar on Vedic cosmology, and he's a PhD in physics from Stanford, and he's very much into cosmology, and he was telling us about how malleable, means shapeable, the whole environment we live in is. And it shapes around the level of our consciousness. And so there are many things in this world. Some things are just things, and other things are my things. Does that change them in any way? Does that change you in any way when they're your things? Anybody drive here tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah? What is your name?
Jason.
Jason, you drove, you parked right out here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's your GTO right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're sitting here, Jason's GTO is sitting right there, and we hear a car careening around the corner and come scraping across, and it sounds just about where you parked your car. Now, how does Jason feel? What else, what symptoms does he have? I mean, he doesn't look like an ordinary person. He looks very, elevated and detached, so it probably doesn't apply to him. But an ordinary Jason. How would an ordinary Jason respond?
Interesting.
Physically, does he go through any changes?
Anxiety.
Anxiety exhibited how? Physically.
Facial expression.
Facial expression, what else?
Sweating.
Sweating, what else?
Punching the shoulders.
Get up.
Punching the shoulders, heart beats faster. Jason runs to the window and he looks out the window. Anybody else drive here?
Yes.
Yeah. What's your name?
Brady.
Brady. So Jason looks out the window and he notices, oh, it wasn't my car, it was Brady's car. Now, how does Jason feel? He's fine. And how about Brady? Heart starts racing, perspiration comes out. Car's just a car. There's lots of cars in Los Angeles that are getting hit right now. Do we care? I mean, in a compassionate, existential way, we might care. But right now we don't care because they're not our cars. So we actually project ourselves into our environment. And it changes the environment, the way we look at it. And it also changes in our relationship with it. It's consequential also. So it's very important. Somebody else said, yes.
Just to piggyback on a few things, a lot of people heard of the Emoto guy who did water crystal
Yes.
analysis, and words carry vibrations and energy. So, you can look it up online. There's different words that they put on these two jars of water, and based on the type of word it is, they have different geometrical patterns in the water crystals, and the words associated with negative energy like hate, anger, fear were all non-symmetrical and disjointed, and the words that were associated with positive things like love and or compassion had more integrated geometrical patterns that had harmony. And so that's just one thing that piggyback. And then another thing is I had a mentor who taught a class, the founder of Kinko's, and it always stuck with me because all he did, it was like one of those 2-credit classes you take extra in college, but he would just hand out articles at the beginning of class, and then we all had to write 3 questions based on the article we read, and then we just shared with each other what based on the questions we asked, what the article was about and what else we could infer or learn from that article. And then basically he was saying the quality of the life you live is the quality of the questions you ask.
Quality of life with it is the quality of questions
And
you
that was
ask.
the whole point of him.
Very helpful.
That stuck with me. So.
Thank you. I'll add that to this conversation. And your first point about the words that we speak being consequential. The words are consequential. We may not notice them because there's a cacophony of sounds in the world. Everybody's talking about something. But every word we speak is a seed, and it has its effect. Therefore, when we go back to the teachings of yoga, we find a very practical but astounding statement, and that is the world is created by sound. Everything's created by sound. It comes from mantra. And it also says in Sanskrit, anavritti shabdat, which means that you can become liberated by sound. There are certain sounds that bring us above the material conception of life and bring us to higher consciousness. You can dismantle the complicated mesh of material entanglement through sound vibration. If you learn how to make the right sound vibration, and in the culture that I come from, the spiritual culture, the line of teachers, they're all focused on how to reform the kinds of sounds that we make in our life. This includes the way that we communicate, and it also includes what you all do. When I walked in here, dear Kula is my wife here, we both walked in, and we noticed that you were chanting mantra. So that's how we began this conversation, is seeing how you had transformed this apparently benign suburb home into a spiritual launching pad. This is a place that you can launch yourself into the higher realms of the universe and of consciousness. And how? Just by sound. So it is now 8:21. I'm 6 minutes past, right? And I feel edified and happy just by having an opportunity to come and have this discussion with you. What you're doing here is very important, coming together intentionally to make transcendental sound together and discuss these topics about what's beyond just the ephemeral body and mind is extremely nourishing, and it's something that you can take out and you can offer to people everywhere you go and make the world a better place. So thanks for doing what you're all doing here, and thank you for having us over. Yes?
Maybe you can let us know how we can follow your lectures or live classes just to continue learning with you.
I invite you to, we're live streaming on Facebook right now. We have a community there that jump on so we can have these conversations. A lot of times we interact live where we're talking to the audience. My name is Vaisesika Das, and that's my Facebook page. And also have a website called fanthespark.com, and a new website coming out with the same name as myself. Will be coming out soon. Happy to see you there, and we'll keep the conversation going. Thank you for asking. And thank you so much. My wife is engaged in, she's a master cook, and she's cooking for 15,000 people right now. She's in the middle of it. So we're keeping our past her bedtime, so we're going to sneak out because I have to go back and take rest because she gets up at about 2:30 in the morning to start her cooking. But she very kindly came down here because she knows how to run all this stuff and get hooked up in the right ways. So if you'll excuse us, we're going to go back to our place. And please go on with what you're doing. Keep the vibration going. Thank you very much.